Bienvenue to Bonjour Paris Live. Our online event series, free for Bonjour Paris members, offers expert lectures, discovery talks, and conversations about la vie française. In between your trips to France, we're here to inspire you. Bonjour Paris has been online since 1995, almost as old as the internet itself. Our website is packed with interesting articles about the culture and history of Paris. And now, thanks to the support of our growing membership base, we're able to showcase new offerings like video and online talks. For details about all the benefits of Bonjour Paris membership, visit our membership page on our website. Enjoy today's presentation and à bientôt!
Bonjour, welcome everybody. Welcome to Bonjour Paris Live. I am Sylvia Davis, culture editor for France Media and your host today for this talk with Paris-based travel blogger Arielle D'Ippolito to discover the 9th Arrondissement. So with that, I will now invite Arielle to start her video. Hey, Arielle.
Hi.
Lovely to see you again.
Yes, I'm so happy to be back.
Back by popular demand. We had great feedback on your previous event, so we're really looking forward to this one. So it's a little bit chilly in Paris today.
Yes, it is freezing.
We go from summer to suddenly sweater, I see again.
Yes, the only one. I packed all my winter stuff away, except for this.
Oh, good thing you kept one. Yeah, I wish it had springtime colors. It's beautiful. So I'll just hand it over to you. All yours.
Perfect. Okay, so today we are covering the 9th Arrondissement of Paris, and I am so excited to be covering this arrondissement. It is one of my favorites, if not my favorite arrondissement. When I was looking for an apartment to live in Paris, I had my heart set on this arrondissement. When people ask me where to stay in Paris, I hands down say the 9th. So I hope that by the end of this webinar, you also are excited to explore the 9th when you come to Paris. I really think that the 9th has so many amazing things to offer. The first and foremost is that it probably offers the most beautiful and aesthetic selection of the Haussmannian style buildings, which just brightens this arrondissement and makes it feel so beautiful. And the other aspect that makes the 9th so unique is that it's a neighborhood where you have real French people who live and who go to work. And so the culture is very representative of authentic French culture as opposed to a more touristic culture that you see in other arrondissements. So this arrondissement is vibrant, it's electric, it truly is amazing. So in the 9th, we do have a prehistoric human presence. There was an excavation done in 1870. They found 80 different animal fossils of elephants, rhinos, deers, as well as 70 different tools made of flint. There was another excavation done in 1836, and this showed a Gallo-Roman necropolis. So they found about 50 skeletons, which proved the existence of a hamlet in the 9th. And alongside the human remains, they found things like vases and pieces of money and nails. So it really did prove that there definitely was a hamlet in the 9th. The 9th, very similar to the 8th, if not worse than the 8th, was always a very wet, swampy marshland. The lands weren't drained here until 1153, when there was a desire to use the space for cultivation. But it will be a consistent theme throughout all of history that the 9th will be flooded, humidity will be a problem. We'll see this later on when the opera was built, but also within the last 100 years, flooding has plagued the 9th. This is a map from the 17th century, so you can see where I have the arrow that points to the 9th. You can see very clearly that it is underdeveloped, it is farmland, it is swampland, there are hills. There was canals that were dug from the east to the west that sort of followed the natural downflow of water, so very wet. This one is a map from 1598, so you have pretty much the same setup. The 9th there, again with the red arrow, is still used for farmland. If you really compare it to Paris in the center. It just looks so different. And one thing that we can notice on both of these maps is that there's this very large enclosure that surrounds Paris. And it's important to talk about because it's important to know how it was created, why it was created, and also to talk about its eventual destruction because it has a huge impact not just on Paris, but on the 9th as well. So the very first enclosure or fortification that we know of was the Gallo-Roman fortification of the 4th century, and this would have wrapped around the entire Ile de la Cité, protecting about 7,000 to 8,000 people. The second fortification we have is the Carolingian fortification of the 11th century, and this is the first barricade that crosses over onto the right side of the Seine. Then we have the fortifications of Philippe Auguste from 1190 to 1215, and this would cover both sides of the Seine, wrapping all the way around Paris and protecting a population of about 50,000. Moving on to the fortifications of Charles V from 1356 to 1383, this would have protected a population of 200,000 people and would have included the Louvre as well as all the private mansions in the Marais. This is what that fortification would have looked like in 1600. You can see it's pretty much a circle that goes all the way around Paris, and it's interesting to look in the very back at the top left-hand corner. You see Montmartre, and the 9th would be just below it if it existed at this time, but you really can have this visual of city of Paris versus 9th versus the 18th. As the years went on, as there was more wars, it became essential to fortify the west end of Paris, which is what we know today as the 8th Arrondissement. And these fortifications were done under Louis XIII and completed in 1630, protecting a population of 450,000. So this is what the final product would have looked like by the end of those fortifications. But when Louis XIV came into power in 1643, he made some radical decisions. At this point, France had won a lot of military battles, and the king really felt like the city was protected even without these fortifications. So ultimately, he decides to destroy them in 1670. And in the exact same place of this fortification that literally lines the entire city of Paris, he builds a 4-kilometer long promenade. And you can see if you look close to the map, there's all these little dots along the promenade. I'll try and highlight it here with my mouse, but those would be trees that were planted. It was really meant to be a beautiful place to promenade. And when this boulevard was created, it really did mark the limits of the city. So as soon as the city ended, we then have the countryside, and in between we have the Grand Boulevard. And it was really just meant as a place for enjoyment of promenade for carriages and people alike. And so it's just important to note that the origin of our Grand Boulevard that we know today come from the 17th century and were an initiative of Louis XIV and not Haussmann, which a lot of people confuse. We don't have anything left of the old fortifications outside of the Porte Saint-Denis and the Porte Saint-Martin. And even that being said, these are not the originals. Literally, the entire fortification was torn down, but these two portes were literally the entrance into the fortification. And so Louis XIV had these two Arcs de Triomphe built in his glory that really are the only remnants of the fortification of times before. So this is what the Grand Boulevard would look like, or does look like today. It goes from Bastille all the way over to Madeleine. And then if you see, it's kind of shaded in a different color of white with a red dotted line around, that would be the 9th. So you have an idea of where the 9th is in relation to the Grand Boulevard. To go through all of the boulevards, because I think it's important to know their names, we start with the Boulevard Beaumarchais, which is the very first boulevard that takes off from Bastille. We have the Boulevard des Filles de Calvaire, the Boulevard du Temple, the Boulevard Saint-Martin, the Boulevard Saint-Denis, the Boulevard de Bonne Nouvelle, Boulevard Poissonnière, Boulevard de Montmartre, Boulevard des Italiens, Boulevard des Capucines, and Boulevard de la Madeleine. So this is what we know today as the Grand Boulevard. We also have the Boulevard Haussmann, which is the small green line there behind the Palais Garnier. But even though this is a boulevard, it is not part of the original Grand Boulevard. So many people include it. It's just not officially part of the Grand Boulevard. And to further help you situate where the Grand Boulevard are, I have the 9th outlined there in black. So the 9th arrondissement touches on the Boulevard Poissonnière, Boulevard Montmartre, Boulevard des Italiens, Boulevard des Capucines, and the Boulevard de la Madeleine, which, in my opinion, are the best boulevard of all the Grand Boulevards. You'll see when you come to this area, it's energetic, it's lively. You have everyone from students to parents to grandparents to tourists who come to this area, especially at night. All of the restaurants, bars, theaters, cinemas are lit up. It really is just the best part of the boulevard, in my opinion. Just a fun little anecdote for you of the Boulevard du Temple. It was actually nicknamed the Boulevard du Crime because it was a criminal hotspot of the 19th century. Over 20 years, 151,000 crimes took place on all of the theaters along this boulevard, which is why it was named the Boulevard of Crime, de Crime. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, when Haussmann did his complete revamp of the city of Paris, this entire street was razed to the ground. All of the theaters were destroyed with the exception of the Théâtre des Âgés. We also see in the early 1800s that the Passages de Paris start to pop up around the Grand Boulevard, and these offer clean and pretty spaces for people to promenade that is safe from the rain and also safe from the dirt and the mud, especially with the horses and carriages. So we do start to see these passages pop up. Over time, as we go on, the bourgeoisie and the nobility decide that they love the Grand Boulevard and want to move there. So as we see this rich population move and build their private mansions along the Grand Boulevard, we also see a lot of other businesses follow this new clientele, and we see a rise in restaurants and bars and cabarets and theaters. And all of a sudden, the Grand Boulevard becomes synonymous with party and pleasure, and it's truly where people used to go and still go today for entertainment. And so people are loving the space, business is booming, but we do have a population problem. From 1804 to 1827, the population doubled, going from 547,000 to 890,000. And by 1850, we are well over 1 million people. You can see where I've highlighted on the map, that is where the 9th would come to be. But at this point in time, the land is not being used as a residential space. It's still being used as farmland, and it's still undeveloped. And this will change because of this population boom. Again, this is another map from the early 1800s, and you can still see there we have Montmartre and the 9th arrondissement circled. It almost looks like nothing exists there compared to the rest of the city. Now, in 1852, Napoleon III becomes emperor, and he wants to completely change Paris. He was very inspired by the trips that he made to London, and so he nominates the Baron Haussmann, and he gives him 3 instructions: to ventilate, unify, and beautify the city of Paris. And so from 1853 to 1870, Haussmann turns Paris into a complete construction zone. It is insane to think of what Paris was before, during, and after Haussmann. And so we can accredit a lot of the architectural changes and improvements to Haussmann. We have the homogeny in not only the building architecture, the classic Haussmannian style, but also in the little details like the benches, the grates, the lampposts, especially with the green space as well. We have the parks and the squares that are used to ventilate the city. He is also responsible for the train stations and for a lot of big cultural establishments that are built in Paris. And I think it's interesting to look back at the photos before and during Haussmann. The 2 photos on the left would be what Paris looked like before the big Haussmann renovation. It was very dirty. The streets were very narrow. There was not great access to clean water. People used the Seine not just to bathe and to wash, but also as drinking water. And then the 2 photos on the right-hand side is sort of what the construction would have looked like while Haussmann took over. It is very impressive, truly, to think that this was what Paris looked like before. But the reason I mention all of this is because one of the main cultural establishments that Haussmann contributing to, and certainly Napoleon III, what was built under both of their vision was the Palais Garnier, the opera house. And that brings us back to the Grand Boulevard, because if you walk along the Grand Boulevard and you stay in the 9th, you would start this promenade at the Palais Garnier. So before the Palais Garnier, we had La Salle Louvois, which was built in 1791, and it was more of a theater than an opera house. But when the Duc de Berry was assassinated upon exiting the Salle Louvois, Louis XVIII ordered its destruction. So the Salle Louvois was destroyed, and in the interim, as sort of a stand-in, François Debray designed Le Pelletier, which, like I said, was a stand-in for the opera house, but they were waiting to build a more permanent, magnificent structure. And so in 1860, a contest was launched, and 171 designs were submitted. And ultimately, on the 30th of May, 1861, it was the 35-year-old architect Charles Garnier who won, and the opera house was inaugurated in 1874. Now, there is so much to talk about when it comes to the Palais Garnier. I think there could be several webinars dedicated to the subject, so I won't lecture for too long, but I will share a couple of interesting stories and anecdotes that I picked up on the many tours that I've done of the Palais Garnier. I think the first thing that's the most interesting to note is that everything about the Palais Garnier was designed for performance, and not just the stage. Literally every moment spent in this building is meant to be a performance. Women would arrive here in their most beautiful gowns, their most expensive jewelry, and so it was important that the building was designed in a way to showcase this as sort of a pre-show to the show. Because you didn't just come to the opera to be entertained. You came to the opera to socialize, to do business, to network. And it was definitely a reflection of the businessmen on how their wives were dressed. The more wealthy the women looked, the more respected the businessmen were. So there definitely was this huge emphasis on personal appearance. And we see this, for example, in the members-only area of the Palais Garnier. So before, when it opened, the wealthiest people of society could pay to be members of the opera house. And not only did you have your own entrance into the opera, you had your own cloakroom, but you also had access to this very large circular space that you see on the screen that was lined with mirrors. And the point of this room was for the members to be able to retouch their dresses, their hair, their jewelry, make sure everything was in place before they walked on stage. And as you exit this members only area, you enter into the great hall, and you come face to face with this beautiful white marble staircase that forks off in two directions towards the Grand Foyer. And you can imagine what a spectacle it would have been to have all these women in their colorful, beautiful gowns just gliding up the staircase. And this really does showcase this pre-show of the opera. Now, when you walk into the actual theater, you are just met with absolute opulence. It is red velvet and gold detailing everywhere. It looks very expensive, very chic. You also have a 7-ton bronze chandelier that hangs from the ceiling. And this ceiling, in and of itself, has caused much debate over time. These are the two ceilings that were painted for the Palais Garnier. You have the original on the right-hand side. It was painted by Jules Eugène Lenepveu. And it was loved, but in 1964, Marc Chagall, you have his version on the left-hand side, he was commissioned by the Minister of Culture to create a more contemporary piece of art that showcases the works of 14 different composers. If you look closely, you can identify Mozart's The Magic Flute, you can see Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. You will also note that the colors are very different in Marc Chagall's interpretation of the opera ceiling, and that's sort of what causes debate. Many people consider it to be a little bit ugly, and it's tough because this photo doesn't really do the colors justice, but when you walk into the theater area, these colors are exceptionally vivid. And it is a little bit jarring to feel like you're in this very antique space and then come face to face with the primary colors. It's definitely something to see. But whether we like it or not, it's there, but it's not necessarily there to stay. We haven't lost the original. Marc Chagall's version was actually painted on a removable frame. So both versions, both paintings are still intact. Now, what hangs from the ceiling is also a little bit not mysterious, but it has, sparked some debates, the 7-ton chandelier. There was a point during a performance in 1896 when one of the counterweights actually broke free, killing a concierge. And this was actually the inspiration in the scene in The Phantom of the Opera at the end of Act 1 when the chandelier crashes on stage. Now, there is one room that is a mystery. I haven't even visited, and I've been to the Palais Garnier many times. It's called the Foyer de la Danse, and this is where dancers rehearse before a performance. And when the membership system was still in place, paying members could actually visit the Foyer de la Danse before a performance and socialize with the dancers. And I'm sure we can imagine what likely very explicit things would have happened here between these wealthy men and these young, beautiful dancers. And the reason I mention this is because I recently took a tour of the Musée d'Orsay, and I saw this statue called La Danse by Jean-Baptiste Carpeau. And it was a statue that was commissioned to be put outside of the Palais Garnier, and it shows basically a group of women dancing naked in a circle. And what this statue is meant to showcase is basically an advertisement for the form of prostitution that was going on inside of the opera house. So it was a very scandalous statue at the time. Now, I do want to move on and talk a little bit about the lake, the mysterious lake under the opera house, because there is some truth to it. It does exist. It is actually integral to the building stability. What I also think is very cool about this model, you can find this at the Musée d'Orsay, is that you can see all of the insides of the Palais Garnier. And it's so interesting because you have the Great Hall here all the way at the right-hand side. And when you enter, it looks so big, but it's really so minuscule compared to the rest of the opera house. The Foyer de la Danse is all the way at the other end on the left side here. You have the theater in the middle, and then below everything is this mysterious lake. And so during construction, Charles Garnier discovered that the site where the opera was going to be built was very marshy, like we've discussed, and the building would be under constant threat of flooding. And so his solution was to build this lake, but it's more of a watertight concrete tub that is filled with water. And it sort of resists the pressure from the water to come up, and it also stabilizes the building as well. There is a third benefit, which Charles Garnier thought of, is that if there was ever a fire that broke out in the opera house, the firefighters could use the water from this giant reservoir. Unfortunately, you also can't visit this in the opera. The only people who have ever gone down here are firefighters who sometimes do their training here. Moving on down the Grand Boulevard, we have the Hôtel Drouot, which opened in 1852. It is the oldest auction house in the world, and it is still one of the, it is still the most popular auction house in Paris today. I very frequently participate in the auctions at Hôtel Drouot. You can really find some amazing things. I've scored a Dior handbag for 40 euros, Dior gloves, all the picture frames in my apartment are from the auction house. I really do recommend that you check them out either online or in person when you're in Paris. Next, along the boulevard, we have the Passage Verdot and the Passage Geoffroy. And the Passage Verdot is essentially just an extension of the Passage Geoffroy. Both passages were built in 1846, and the Passage Geoffroy was actually the very first passage built in Paris that had glass and metal. So you can see it has this very beautiful natural light that enters into the passage. It became very popular because the exit to the Musée Grévin is inside this passage. Here, I would recommend the store that you see on screen, the Maison Roy. They have a lot of antiques and also artistic creations that really maintain the 18th century aesthetic. I always buy a Christmas ornament from the store in the winter. You also have the Hôtel Chopin in the Passage Geoffroy, and I think it'd be very fun to stay there. The Passage Verdot, on the other hand, is a lot less popular, I would say. It wasn't really popular until 1980 when the Hôtel Drouot brought one of their auction house stores here, and that led to other antique stores popping up and other bars and restaurants. It's still very beautiful, definitely worth a visit. It just is a little bit less of an attraction than the Passage Geoffroy. Now, I mentioned that the exit to the Musée Grévin is in the Passage Geoffroy, and that is the next thing that you should see along the boulevard. The Musée Grévin is essentially a wax museum, but it has a very interesting story. Arthur Mayer, who was the owner of the newspaper Le Gaulois, wanted to find a way to show his readers what the people being talked about in the press actually looked like. So he called on his caricaturist, Alfred Grévin, as well as a costume designer to make these lifelike wax replicas of the people that were being written about in the press. And so today it still is a wax museum, but what's so interesting about it aren't just the 200 wax lifelike statues, but also a lot of the rooms that have maintained their original integrity, their original decor. It is a very interesting experience. Now, no trip to Paris is complete without visiting a bouillon, and you have one of the most famous bouillons along the Grand Boulevard. For anyone who might not know, a bouillon is a Parisian tradition that started in 1860 by the butcher named Pierre-Louis Duval. He was a pretty known butcher, but he definitely had a more elite clientele, I want to say. Definitely a very wealthy clientele who weren't interested in eating any of the less noble parts of meat. So in order to save money, to cut some costs, he took this less noble meat and offered these hot French meals to the working class. And that sort of started this popularization of the bouillon. The concept of affordable hot meal was very popular. And this is actually the first case of a chain restaurant that we see open in France because he started to open so many. And when he passed, he left this bouillon empire to his son. But also a lot of competitors started to pop up, one of which being the bouillon chartier. And the bouillon chartier was opened by two brothers in 1896 in an old train station, and they were so amazed by the space that it was integral for them um, to keep the very high ceilings, the mirrored walls, all of the clocks, and to add to this ambiance by installing very rich wood furniture and bulbed light fixtures. So it really does feel like you're stepping back in time when you eat at the Bouillon Chartier. And in 1989, it was actually classified as a historical monument. So this is definitely somewhere that you want to eat at least once during your trips to Paris. I will say, though, it is insanely popular. I would not come here on a Friday or Saturday night. You will absolutely 100% wait a minimum of an hour and a half in line. If you can come here on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday at about 6:30, that is perfect. Now, moving down to the very end of the Grand Boulevard of the 9th Arrondissement, we have the iconic Grand Rex, which no doubt you have definitely seen just because it is so massive and so impressive. Now, the Grand Rex was created by Jacques Haïk. He had this dream of making the most impressive and grand cinema. And in 1932, he made this dream a reality. And what is so striking about the Grand Rex is not necessarily the outside, although as you can see, the outside facade is very beautiful. But the Grand Rex is actually known for their atmospheric rooms. You have the Grand Hall here, and it sort of imitates a Mediterranean night. So you watch your film in a very ambianced way. You have a beautiful blue sky painted on the ceiling with all of the stars. And the theater is actually framed by these Italian balconies and these Greek statues. It's very special, I think, to watch a film here. In 1960, the Grand Rex actually had higher attendance than the Louvre, if you can imagine. And every year it has about 1 million visitors come and watch a film. So definitely a must when you're in Paris. Now, moving away from the Grand Boulevard more towards the west side of the 9th, we have so much more to see, starting with the Boulevard Haussmann. It is considered to be one of the most elegant streets in Paris, and it's fitting that it's named after Haussmann because actually during his revamp of Paris, he had to destroy this street, and this was actually where he was born. So he ended up having to destroy his home to make this boulevard. So it's interesting that it's named after him. Along the Boulevard Haussmann, we have two very known, very popular department stores, the first of which is the Galerie Lafayette. And in 1893, we have two cousins, Alphonse Kahn and Théophile Bader, who decide to purchase 70-meter squares and open this store on the Rue Lafayette and the Rue Chaussée-d'Antin. And it gets its name because it had these very long aisles across it, and so it became this Galerie Lafayette. One thing that is very interesting, a little anecdote to share about the Galerie Lafayette, is it's actually the very first time that we see knockoffs. Not the first time, but it surprised me that so early on we see knockoffs becoming trendy. Essentially, Théophile, one of the cousins, realized that in order to stay relevant, he had to offer the trendiest products. And so he decides to make the in-house brand, the Galerie Lafayette brand, to sell clothing. And in order to design this clothing, he takes an in-house designer with him to the opera in the evenings, and she discreetly sketches out the most beautiful gowns that women are wearing, and they rush back, have these mock-ups produced and available for sale in their store. And so that's how they maintained their popularity. And the Galerie Lafayette was very, very successful. Not only were they along the Grand Boulevard, but they're also right behind the Palais Garnier. So you just have this very wealthy clientele that starts to shop at the Galerie Lafayette. I adore the Galerie Lafayette. I think they have great sales in January and February, also in June and July if you're in Paris. They have an amazing decor. It's very open concept. They do have the famous Christmas tree and Christmas decor in the winter. They also have a glass walk that you can do at the very top of the Galerie, and it's free, but you do have to select a time slot. So I put a QR code there. If you're interested in doing the glass walk, I definitely recommend that you scan that QR code now so that you have the link to book a time slot. If you try and book on the day of, you will wait 3 or 4 hours. My favorite part of the Galerie Lafayette is going to be the view. Of course, you have this amazing view of the Eiffel Tower and the opera. But also in the summer, they do open probably my favorite restaurant, which is Créature. And of course, you have this view, but you also have this amazing food. It's relatively unknown. You can see here I'm having my little brunch, and there was almost no one. So it is one of the best restaurants in the summer. They haven't posted their opening date yet, but if you are coming to Paris soon, definitely keep an eye out for it. Now we're going to end our tour of the 9th Arrondissement closer to the 18th, near the Place Pigalle, and I don't want to go too much into this area for a couple of reasons. You can see on the map here the border of the 9th. Yes, it touches the Boulevard de Clichy. Yes, we are a little bit in Pigalle, but really it's only the right-hand side of the road, sorry, the left-hand side of the road. And all of the cool things are on the left side. So for example, my favorite bouillon, the Bouillon Pigalle, is in the Square Pigalle. It is on the Boulevard de Clichy, but because it's on the right-hand side, it's part of the 18th and not the 9th. We have the Moulin Rouge also, which is on the Boulevard de Clichy, but again, it's on the right-hand side, so it's part of the 18th and not the 9th. So I don't really want to attribute this, the culture of the 18th to the 19th, but what I will say is this, is that there has been a historic separation of the 9th from the 18th. We have the Mur des Fermiers Généraux that was built in 1784. This was essentially a 24-kilometer long wall built around Paris with 54 different checkpoints. These were tax offices built along this wall, and essentially the purpose of this wall was to be able to control and tax anything that was being imported into the city of Paris. You will note that we are in 1784, right before the revolution. This was definitely a contributing factor to the uproar of the people. It was just more taxes that people needed to pay. So this wall was very much hated. But my point here is that there is this historical separation of the 9th and the 18th. What I will say is that we do have the, here is a close-up. You can see on the upper hand corner, that's the 9th that we know today, and it literally follows the exact same path as the Mur des Fermiers Généraux. What I will say is that we do have the Place Pigalle, but it was not always referred to as the Place Pigalle. This was originally one of the 54 tax offices, and it was called the Barrière de Montmartre, which is the barrier of Montmartre. You can see On the bottom left side, I've circled where this would be on the map today. You can see the wall and see how underdeveloped Montmartre is at this point in time. This map is from 1790. And the photo on the upper left corner, that is what this barrier would have looked like originally. Now, once the walls were taken down in 1860 by Haussmann, this is when he annexed Montmartre into Paris as the 18th arrondissement. They did create the Place Pigalle. They installed this beautiful fountain. And yes, we do see all of the artists that had started to live in the Quartier des Nouvelles Athènes in the 9th sort of venture up into the 18th in this area. Around this fountain, for example, you have painters and artists who came to seek out women who would model for their art. You also have the Rue des Martyrs, which is a very beautiful road that goes from Notre-Dame de Lorette all the way up to Sacré-Cœur. And so we do see this shift of the artists going from the 9th into the 18th. And over time, we do see the eclectic, the energetic, the fun spirit of the 18th arrondissement develop, but it would be doing a disservice to the 18th to attribute that sort of culture to the 9th. So I will leave you guys there in the 9th. I hope you enjoyed this visit. I hope you learned something new. And if you have any questions, I would love to answer them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ariel. That was just exquisite. I love the way you mix the history with the contemporary, because then you can understand why these things took shape the way they did. And I don't know if you can see, but there's thumbs up, reactions, and applause.
I can never see. Thank you.
So hearts, lots of hearts.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to mention that of course, you can follow Ariel's work on her YouTube channel. Ariel's a Canadian blogger based in Paris, and at Get the Margarita. But you also launched recently a website.
Oh, yes. It's very, very exciting. It's just over the time, I just have all this information, nowhere to put it. So I started to design itineraries that are similar to my presentations, which will cover a 24-hour itinerary, but also give the context of why we're visiting these places, what the places are on the itinerary, as well as a guide, what to order, how to order, just everything, a go-to guide for Paris. And so I've started to put those on my website.
Excellent. I'll be checking it out. So everybody go to getthemargaritas in plural.com. And we have questions coming in. So Arlene says, I saw Cinderella at Palais Garnier with my sister in 1965. We sat in a box. It was lovely. I knew the story since there was no translation. That is true. It's an important detail, that if you don't know the story, you would miss, and you don't speak French, you would miss it. So that sounds lovely, Arlene. Thanks for sharing. And we have another question. Is it possible to visit the Palais Garnier even if you're not going to a concert or the opera?
Yes, that I have done several visits. It's so interesting. They offer daytime visits, but what also is very special, they don't offer them all year round. They offer them, I believe, starting in February or March. So they're already open, but you can visit the Opera House in the evenings. And that's where the video clips that I took and showed in this presentation were from, because you essentially have the Palais Garnier all to yourself. Occasionally you can run into dancers, and it's very special. You can see the Phantom of the Opera suite. So I definitely recommend doing both a daytime tour and an evening tour.
Excellent. So yes, it's just a splendid building. And Fred would like to make a note to clarify that you mentioned the and you showed, actually, which is very interesting, the Square Montelon. Mm-hmm. And the sculptures that were there that were melted down for the war effort. And Fred would like to clarify that they were melted down by the Nazis for their war effort at the time. It's very, very important point. Thank you, Fred. And Madeline would like to know, Is there a luxury hotel you would recommend? And Margaret asked a related question. Which luxury hotel would you recommend that has a pool?
Oh
And
my gosh.
Margaret says, thank you for this beautiful journey through the Nine. Thank you, Margaret.
Oh, thank you. I am so sorry. I don't know of a hotel with a pool. They are hard to come by, I will say that. What I can say is the hotel on my list, because I also do a series on my channel where I stay in hotels. The hotel that I booked for the 9th is the Hotel Chopin. I think it is very interesting to be able to stay in the Passage Geoffroy, and I think you're very ideally situated on the Grand Boulevard. So that's what I would recommend.
Isn't it one of the oldest, one of the first? Yeah. And I know one luxury hotel with a pool that I can recommend. May I?
Yes.
I know the Molitor, but it is in the 16th. And it has a legendary swimming pool. It is amazing. Worth going just for the swimming pool. So Madeline asks also, how is the Musée La Vie Romantique?
The Musée de la Ville Romantique is very beautiful. It's very interesting. I think if you don't have a lot of prior knowledge, it's challenging because they don't have a lot of panels like you would have in other museums. They do have an app, which you can find in the App Store. I definitely recommend that you download it. It's in English and in French. So that way you can at least follow along with the pieces of art. But I do think it's a very interesting place to go. Like I mentioned, they have interesting pieces like lockets with hair in them and very interesting jewelry and fans. It's a big collection of not just paintings, but also little trinkets as well. They do also have exhibitions that take place. The next one, I believe, is starting next month. I visited a couple weeks ago, and so they unfortunately weren't on, but the exhibitions take place in the old atelier of the artists, which I think is so beautiful, but unfortunately you can't access them unless there is an exhibition. So I would definitely recommend going at a time when they do have an exhibition running. That way you can see the house and the garden, but also the atelier.
And the cafe.
Yes. And the cafe.
Which it looked gorgeous. So thanks again, Ariel. I'm already looking forward to your next presentation. This was absolutely amazing.